Hey guys, Shadow the Rat, and for today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can hardware cloth a rat cage. Now, hardware clothing a cage is basically when you put a metal mesh on the outside of the cage in order to make the bar spacing smaller. A lot of cages out there are made for larger animals, and a lot of larger animals can be in cages with bar spacing of an inch or more. However, with rats, because they're so small, most rats need cages with bar spacings of half an inch or less. So if you are getting, let's say, a guinea pig cage, which is often going to have 1 inch bar spacing, and you want to repurpose it as a rat cage, then you're usually going to need to use some hardware cloth in order to make the bar spacing smaller. Now when you go to get hardware cloth, and you can pretty much find it at any hardware store like Lowe's or Home Depot, but anyways, when you go to get it, you will find that there is a plastic version and a metal version. You want the metal version. The plastic version will be chewed through so quickly, and this stuff is so annoying to put on the cage, so I would highly recommend only putting something on there that is going to last, and that's only going to happen if you use the metal version. So make sure you're using the metal hardware cloth. And as for the spacing on the hardware cloth, you'll find that it comes in 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch. Personally, I would recommend that you use the 1/2 inch because it's going to make hanging up things in the cage much easier. The other things you're going to need are some wire cutters and some zip ties. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started with hardware clothing the cage. So the first thing you want to do is measure your cage. I kind of screwed up here. I did not measure the cage properly because I did not take into account the extra surface area due to the corners being curved. I would definitely recommend doing a better job measuring than I did, but I did measure the top and bottom alongside each side, and once I had those measurements, then I went ahead and cut them out of the hardware cloth. So I just had a bunch of scraps laying around, which is why you see me cutting it out of these already seemingly cut squares. That's not because I pre-cut them, that's just how I already had them. But if you get hardware cloth new, it's going to be in a roll, so you're probably going to have to put some weights on it. I actually did so in this video as well. I put some weights on each piece on each side, and that just helps to, well, first of all, start flattening it, which is ideal because you are going to need it kind of flat for when you put it on the cage, but it also helps make the cutting process a little bit easier. So once you've cut out all your hardware cloth pieces, then I recommend keeping them out for a few hours or even a day if possible under some weights, and this just helps to make them a little flat. I didn't leave mine out for very long, so they didn't really get too flat, but it does help if you have some time to just leave them out under some weights, because that way when you put it on the cage, you're not going to be fighting as much with the hardware cloth to keep it from curling, and it will try to curl on you, so it really does help to flatten it out. Anyways, at this point you can go ahead and actually start to attach it to the cage. So I went ahead and put my first hardware cloth, which I did the top first because I figured it'd be easiest, and then I went ahead and zip tied that on with a bunch of zip ties. And you pretty much want to put as many zip ties as possible. Just try to make sure that the hardware cloth is in contact with the bars as much as possible. You really want to zip tie it on tight so that it's as flat as possible and just really flush against the bars. So once I did the top, I cut off the excess zip tie bits and then went ahead and hardware cloth the rest of the cage. So I did each side, just zip tying on each piece of hardware cloth. This is when I noticed that I hadn't cut out enough for the curved bits, so I just did my best to align the hardware cloth on one side so that I only had 2 sides to cover instead of all 4. Now after I finished this, I went ahead and cut out a little bit of extra hardware cloth and put this over the corners and just zip tying it in place. I didn't film this because I didn't plan for it to be short like this, but I'm pretty sure you can visualize exactly what I did. I'm just going to show you the end product here. As you can see, it's pretty much zip tied flush against the cage. Now, this is where things got a little complex because you might realize that I do not have a door on my cage. So yeah, this is a bit of a problem because it does have a door. It has a cage door up top, but I kind of put hardware cloth over it because I was not planning on using it. I was planning on just lifting off the cage top from the bottom and then putting stuff inside it and then putting the cage bottom back on, but I quickly realized we had a bit of an issue, which was that this cage is kind of flimsy, and once I zip tied on all this hardware cloth, that actually kind of stretched the bars out of bounds, so they no longer fit snugly on the cage base. So suddenly I couldn't really put the cage top on the cage base well, so this was a bit of a problem. My solution was to put Velcro on the cage bottom and the cage bar top thing. So this way I was able to connect the base to the bars pretty easily, but unfortunately this created another problem, which is that the Velcro is pretty strong, and so in order to get into the cage, I had to pretty much rip the entire top off the bottom. And so, you know, this is a good thing because I don't want the cage top coming off the bottom without me actually trying to remove it, but it is bad if I'm trying to get a rat out or trying to move stuff around inside without messing everything up, because it means that I need to be pretty forceful with the cage, and that would not be fun for a rat inside. So I decided that I did actually need the top door, and this is when I went back and actually cut it out. Now, I did not film this either because this was another thing that I was not planning for, but I essentially just cut the hardware cloth right around the door, so it just made the door possible to lift up and down. So it was a pretty easy fix, but it still took some extra time, and I was kind of kicking myself because I did not plan this very well. So, if you're planning to do this yourself, my recommendation is to actually have a bit of a plan first. Don't go into it like I did, just thinking, I'm just going to do this really quickly because that never works. You always end up having to change something. Anyways, all in all, this took me quite a while. I'd say it took about, oh my gosh, maybe 3 hours total, and that was for a small cage. Now, granted, some of that was me messing up and having to go back and fix my mistakes, but still, if you are going to do this, just be aware that it's going to take some time, and your hands are going to get completely scratched up, so it's really not a fun process. So because of that, I recommend that if you are looking for a cage, please go ahead and get one with appropriate bar spacing, 1/2 inch or smaller. There's really no reason to get a cage with larger bar spacing if you're actually buying a cage for the first time. The only time I'd say it's worth it is if you're getting a second-hand cage that is really cheap and in good condition, but it has 1-inch bar spacing. In that case, it is worth it to get it and hardware cloth it. But if you're buying a cage new, then there's really no need to get a cage that has 1-inch bar spacing because it's just going to take you a lot of time and you're going to have to buy hardware cloth for it anyways. So it's just much better to get a cage with 1/2 inch bar spacing or less if possible. Anyways, if you're wondering why I'm doing it with this cage, that's because I snagged this cage for $5 at a thrift store a few years ago, and I plan to use it as a sick cage / quarantine cage / just whatever I need it for, temporary cage. However, I never really got around to hardware clothing it, which was my plan. So all in all, in the 3 years since I got this cage, I've only used it once, which is kind of sad to think about, and that is why I finally got around to hardware clothing it. So that's what I did in this video. I was hardware clothing this cage so I can actually put it to use. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. Hopefully this video was helpful. I know it's a little bit rambly, but I kind of wanted to walk you through the process while also kind of showing you realistically how this process tends to go. And by that I mean that you end up somehow making a mistake somewhere and having to go fix it, at least if you're me. So anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed and I hope it was helpful, and I hope to see you later. Bye!